Hi everyone, this is just a little video for those of you who like to know for the person that you're voting for rather than the party. So I'm Heather Smith, I'm standing as your candidate for the Australian Federation Party in the seat of Page. I am a primary producer, I raise cattle in the northern part of the electorate up near Woodinbong. I've got 1100 acres up there. It's a development block. I'm a first generation farmer. I worked many years as just a wage earner, putting aside what I could and investing where I could in order to build a resource base to purchase my own farm. That's been the goal since I was 18. I decided when I was working as a station hand that I wasn't going to be chasing other people's horses and chasing other people's cattle and riding other people's horses all my life. It was going to be my horses, my land, my dogs, my cattle. And yeah. What I've got's pretty humble. It's still very much first start, but I'm happy that I got to realise my dream or work on my dream in a way that many other people might have given up. Certainly it's not common for a woman to pursue that dream on her own like I have, but that's my path and I'm happy I took it. So my background is predominantly agricultural. I was raised on 600 acres up near Childers, near Bundaberg in Queensland, where my dad also ran a trucking business because that property was also too small to ever be commercially viable. So my father ran interstate as an owner-driver between Cairns and Melbourne, mostly just general freight. Throw one of us kids in the bunk every now and again on school holidays and take us into the Flemington markets in Sydney or down to Melbourne, and maybe we'd get a trip to the zoo and see a few rallies along the way. So just good, honest, hardworking people on an average income who managed to save and put aside and build a life for themselves. And but there wasn't the resources from their situation or a farm to back me in. So both myself and my siblings are pretty much self-made in what we've established for ourselves as well. So and that gives me heart, the fact that we can do that in Australia. You can come from a fairly simple background or a low base and go forward and chase your own dreams and build your own futures as well. So that's something I really want to hold on to for Australians, and I think it is something that is slipping further and further away for a lot of people. And partially I think the federal government's to blame for that because of some of their policy settings, and that's some stuff I'd really like to get into my teeth into if we happen to end up winning the seat this election. But if not, we're back for other elections. This is not a one-hit wonder here. It really is time for change, and I suppose I've been disillusioned with what's been happening in the political landscape in Australia now for, I don't know, 4 or 5 election cycles. I think I've probably informally voted on a couple of them. I know, but it was probably quite some time back that I informally voted. I'd rock up to the polling booth and look at my options on the ballot paper and say, look, there's no one here who represents my interests. There's no one here who's really committed to rural and regional. And I say that knowing that I sit in a national seat, and I will repeat that there's no one really committed to rural and regional. We haven't made the progress in communications. We haven't made the progress in decentralisation. We haven't made the progress in health and education that we should have been making in rural areas, and we certainly haven't been fostering the smaller sort of transitional end of sector of the industry or the niche markets in the industry. And there's a huge amount of latent potential in Page that we haven't got policy settings or program settings in place to support the development of. And so it stays stuck in that small scale scenario, and the opportunities truly aren't realised. So I want to be a genuine representative for agriculture and rural and regional communities to make sure that we get the resources we need out in the regions. I think we're in danger of losing, that regional voice on the floor of Parliament, and we have to defend that fiercely at the moment and make sure that we hold that ground and hold that voice. Professionally, I left home around 15, went to agricultural college up in Emerald, graduated from there and did the usual station hand and showing cattle and various bits and pieces bobbing around before going to university to study the Bachelor of Applied Science in Rural Management at Gatton at UQ. and graduated from there and went out into various agricultural roles in a professional way, including land care facilitation, which was one of the first roles I held and introduced me to regenerative agriculture. Before it was coined regenerative, at that point it was all sorts of other grazing principles, and there was the Alan Savory holistic framework underpinning that decision making, but it wasn't a common language or a commonly understood philosophy at that point in time. But here we are at least 20 years on, and regenerative agriculture and the philosophy of it is starting to gain mainstream understanding and attention, and also get some investment which was sorely needed to allow it to be adapted to the larger scale agricultural settings, particularly our broadacre cropping settings and some of our horticultural settings. So if we can get those principles pushed across into those areas, if we can invest in developing the tools and the products that are needed to really see that thrive, I think there's a brilliant future ahead for Australian agriculture, in a way that lets us step away from the high input system, because at the moment our cost of our inputs is rising rapidly. Fertilisers and pesticides, being that a lot of that is import based, is experiencing huge price rises. And if we can find a way to be less dependent on it, that would be very much to our advantage in Australia. Other things, I'm particularly passionate about environmental stewardship. Very, very important to me, obviously with my land care background, and biodiversity sort of situation. I'm acutely aware of the issues that the environmental kind of sector are struggling with at the moment in terms of insecurity of employment and short-term contracts and delays in funding, and that really hamstrings our effectiveness in terms of our environmental on-ground activities. And it's not so much that we don't invest in it, it's that we don't invest in it in an effective way, and we don't invest in it with a long-term vision. And that really needs to be changed, and I'd certainly be one arguing for those shifts in our environmental management policy and structures there. The other thing I'm increasingly concerned about, and look, coming from a lower income background and also being a single person who's well aware that if something goes wrong for me, I have now that I have the farm, I suppose I have a safety net of wealth. But broadly, it would be very easy for me to fall through the cracks if I didn't have that reserve of wealth in the farm. If I was to get hurt or somehow or other affected in a way that kept me out of the workforce and I lost my financial independence. So there's a lot around how we support and empower our most vulnerable members of our community that bother me, and I really want to see us as a nation work harder to ensure that those people who are most at risk are fully supported and safe and empowered to take ownership over the direction of the lives that they're taking. So that and mental health and well-being are particular interests of mine, and I really want to see I'll be taking a pretty close look at the investments that they were making in those areas if I end up in the role of MP. So I've rambled now for a little while. I'll stop rambling. There's probably many areas I haven't touched on that you'd like me to have touched on, but I'll close by saying that the reason I am standing for the Australian Federation Party is that I truly believe in the principles that are underpinning that party in terms of returning the voice of the Australian people to the floor of the Australian Parliament. I think that's crucial, and it's well past time that we took those steps as Australian citizens and as voters to make sure that happens. Good night.